Okay, lahavin zebetos was beer. To understand all this with greater explanation. Hini yedua de za datzilus hu bechinas hamidos datzilus. Of course, we know that za, which refers to zer anpin, which means the little faces, za in the world of atzilus is the midos of atzilus, right? That represents the 6 midos from chesed to yesod. Those are officially called the midos of atzilus. Bechinas vav, kitzvaos, chagas, etc. And that's called the 6 midos are also called the 6 extremities, right? Which is basically Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, which is also up, down, north, south, east, west, or north, south, east, west, right? Hen makar kol amshacho shenimshachu la'olamos biyah, and they are going to be the source of all that flows down to the worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiya. We're talking about the midos of Atzilus, right? Which basically means that before anything comes into Bria, it has to kind of come through up, down, north, south, east, west first, because it has to godliness has to be somehow condensed into something with parameters before it's going to come out to the world of Bria, which means creation, because you can't have something without parameters in creation.
And Atzilus has no parameters.
Atzilus above the 6 spheros. It doesn't have parameters of up, down, north, south, east, west. Maybe it has parameters of intelligence of some level, but it's too expansive in order to actually come into it has to flow. That's why, for example, there's 7 days of creation, because the main giving over from Atzilus is from these 6 spheros, and as they flow through Malchus, which is basically the 6 days of the week and Shabbos.
So the Chabad of Atzilut has no parameters.
Again, I can't say it has 0 parameters. Okay, but you're saying spheros. They don't have the parameters of the levels
down,
of
left,
yes.
Right. But you're saying that the Chabad of Bria has parameters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. All right. So all that flows into the lower worlds must come through these 6 midos. Al Yidei Bechinas Malchus, and it's the 6 midos, but then those 6 midos themselves come out of Malchus. So even though after it's come on up, down, north, south, east, west, it doesn't really gain a full level of constriction until those 6 midos then flow through another portal, which is called Malchus, which is like the speech. So how would you kind of understand that in regular layman's terms? Is if you have an idea, right, you have to first basically bring that idea down into some kind of an emotional leaning, right? And then even after it's in an emotional leaning, which is basically the 6 midos, right? You're going to give the idea some kind of you're going to knock it down a stage into an emotion. Let's say it's going to take on more, and then you have to speak it out of your mouth, which means you have to, even after it's at an emotional level, you have to contract it into letters, literally, in order for it to actually come out. And so by the time it comes out into the world of Bria, which is basically the other person, it's already contracted itself twice. It's gone through from the mind into the midos, and then those midos have put themselves through Malchus, which is the speech. Shu Dibra Elyon, and therefore Malchus of Atzilus is Hashem's mouth. It's like the higher speech, right? From which he's going to create all the worlds, starting in Bria. And this is what it says in the Zohar. Well, it says in the Chumash, but the Zohar explains. It says 6 days Hashem made. Hashem made 6 days. It doesn't say in 6 days Hashem made. If you notice in the Chumash, it does not say Hashem made the world in 6 days. It just says Hashem made 6 days. And why does it say that? It's because it's referring not to a timeline that it took him 6 days to make the world, which in a certain sense it also did. But before it took him 6 days to make the world, he already had those 6 days tucked away, because what he first made was 6 days. In other words, what is the 6 days? It's the 6 higher spheros. That's what it means. Hashem made 6 days. He made the 6 higher days, which is Chesed until Yesod of Atzilus. So he made all those. He made up, down, north, south, east, west inside of himself, right? But not one after the other per se. He just made like all of that. It's like sort of time and space in its roots, right? And then through the mouth, he delineated one after the next. But the concept is that in Torah it does not say he created the world in 6 days, because it's coming to teach us this lesson. He created the world 6 days.
So are we saying that the world as it exists in its
Tzilus.
But are we saying that the world as it exists in Malkut, in this reality here, is the result of his speech in Bria?
For sure. If it wasn't for his speech in Bria, then there would certainly be no Yetzira and Asiya that followed.
Okay, but you could say that if it first was conceived in Atzilut as a pure thought, then it was spoken in Bria as a word, and then it was acted. Or do we say that the action in Malkut is a direct result of the speech in Bria, and there's no intermediary between those two?
The speech of Atzilus. Remember, every there's a lot of, again, it's like we want to explain every single thing under the sun in the 4 letters Yud Kei Vav Kei. So you have to obviously use them in different contexts. They're like variables. So even though we're saying that Malchus is the speech of God, right? Once he speaks,
Bria, you mean?
Malchus is the speech. Malchus is where the words come out.
Okay.
When they come out, they create the world of Bria, right?
Bria is much higher than Malkut. I'm so confused.
No, because there's a Malchus of Bria.
Okay, well, that's what we're talking about. Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say. There's Yud Kei Vav Kei, but there's different levels of it. So what I'm trying to say is, when you want to talk about there's Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, and you were going in the right direction there, that's considered thought, speech, and action.
Right. Within Malkut.
After Malchus. In other words, Malchus of Atzilus is even Malchus of Atzilus, we're calling it speech, but really it's like, it's still part of Atzilus, and in general, Atzilus is still one with God. It's not something that's really separated from himself yet. Whereas the garments of the soul, just like your 10 soul powers, right, are really one with you. Whereas what you're going to then cloak your 10 soul powers with is thought, speech, and action, that refers to Bria, Tzir, and Asiya. So all those 3 are like a step away. And yes, in step-like form, one lower than the other, than Atzilus at all. And when we say that the Malchus of Atzilus is called the mouth, which would indicate that Bria is therefore made of speech, no, we're like changing the metaphor all of a sudden. Once it comes out of the mouth, it's actually more akin to thought.
Right, of course.
Because thought is also an expression, right?
Of a word
right.
inside the mind.
Right.
The mouth of thought.
Exactly, the mouth of thought, you could say.
But there's no such thing as the action in Atzilut or
There
Bria.
is, but it's just like, for example, if you want to say that there's every level has an action quality. For example, if you want to think and you want your thoughts to produce an emotion, you have to go from the pure abstract thought to the practical thought to the actual thought which is going to give birth to the emotion. So in thought itself, there's levels. And there's something called the action of thought.
Right.
And so the action of thought is the lowest aspect of thought, which is then going to lead into the highest part of emotion, let's say.
But you mean
It's not actual action.
That makes sense. That makes sense. But why then would we say that it would be the thought? Sorry, why would we say it would be the speech of Atzilut that creates the thought in Bria? Couldn't it be then the action of Atzilut, aka the emotion of Atzilut, which transfers to the thought of Bria? Because that would make sense. Why would you stop one before?
I'll tell you why, but then I want to stop with the divergence.
Yeah,
okay, but I'll explain your answer. The reason why we say that Hashem created the world with speech and not action is because, first of all, Hashem doesn't speak and he doesn't act. They're all metaphors, right? And so we're basing it on what it looks like down here. We're trying to project it to what's going on up there. So what's the connotation between speech? The difference between speech and action is that speech maintains a connectivity to the one who's speaking. Speech is what we're saying. When we're saying speech, we mean live speech, right? Not like recorded speech per se. Like the Hashem is speaking, which means as the speech comes out, it's clear that it's coming out from the speaker. Action has the connotation that you make something and you put it on the shelf and the maker walks away, right? That's the notion of action. You put your energy into a bowl that you made, put the bowl in the shop, and you go home. And your energy of action is contained in this bowl without having any visible connection to the one who made it. That's one of the connotations of speech and action. Speech is connected, action is disconnected, right? So the reason we don't say Hashem created the world with action, although sometimes we do, by the way, right? It says Sheishis Yom Asa. Here we do say Hashem made action the world with 6 days. But in general, we talk about Baruch Sha'amar B'Haya Olam. Blessed is he who spoke in the world creation. Why don't we say blessed is he who acted in the world came into creation? And the reason is because we want to recognize that the world, even after it's been made, is still connected to Hashem as though it's visibly coming out of the speaker. He did not make it and walk away from it. He's still connected to it. because he made it and walked away from it. This is like there's a whole chapter in the Tanya which basically says like mud covers the eyes of the fool who's going to think that Hashem is like a craftsman on earth who made the world and is no longer no longer connected to it. God forbid, right? The world wouldn't exist unless Hashem was perpetually enlivening it. So it's not like he put it down and walked away and he's not connected. And therefore we say speech, even though really that's how it is by Hashem. To us, it feels like action. That therefore there is a concept that Hashem made the world with action, because the way we feel is that Hashem made the world and walked away. That's how we experience reality. We don't see or experience God continuously enlivening us. But when we talk about how he actually did it, we say speech, because in his perspective, it's still connected to him and he's constantly needing to enliven it. From our perspective, it feels like action because it feels to us Hashem made the world and walked away.
And you said asiya
I don't
is
want to
associated
get
with action?
Yeah, asiya is action. Asiya, that's what the word asiya means, is to do.
Oh.
All right, I want to go on. That was fun and all. But we got to get through this mimer. It's going to be Rosh Hashanah soon, my friends. Okay, so anyway, it doesn't say in 6 days. It says Hashem made 6 days. Now we know that the midos of Atzilus receive brain, right, receive mind from the Chochmah and Bina of Atzilus. Right? That's just like here, he says, Al derech mashal, hamidos b'leiv adam, just like by way of analogy, the emotions in the heart of man. Shenimshach seichel v'tam l'midosa. Right? There has to be drawn an intelligence and a reason to your midos, otherwise you're not going to feel love unless you meditated on something which causes you to be like draw close to something, or you're meditating on something that causes you to pull away from it and create fear. As it says, in accordance with his intelligence, a man will praise. Which the way we're explaining that is, you only praise, i.e. have an emotion based on the empowering of the intelligence that causes it. Just like when you have love in your heart, there's a reason behind why you're loving. Now the intellect and the reason that's in the midah, that's in the emotion, of course it's contracted in accordance with the new dimension and and sort of spiritual level of a midah. So it's not pure intellect anymore. If it's pure intellect, it would be too much and overload the section of you called emotion, right? Because your pure intellect reverberates on a much more higher plane than emotions. Mind is higher than heart. But nonetheless, in the heart, you for sure have mind, because the heart and the emotions cannot even be born unless there's a continuous mind, an idea that's perpetuating them. But when the mind comes to the heart, it's no longer of the same quality of mind that's in the brain. It contracts itself to be at the level of mind that the heart can handle, i.e. the underlying reason for your emotion. Getting it? Yisrael, you with me?
I spaced out.
Don't space out.
Neshama's with you, Rabbi.
Yep, your neshama is with me. The ein lo erech lagabi etzel haseichel, and it has the intelligence which is in the heart now has no comparison whatsoever with the intelligence which is in the brain. Because that's like a completely different order of intelligence. It's not the intelligence to power an emotion; it's just pure intelligence.
And the one that's in the heart, it also has the power and emotion, and eventually power and action.
Well,
right?
Not really, because what's going to power the action is going to be now the emotion, which is already only has a drop of brain in it. Yeah. So the emotion, what's going to power the action is that the emotion itself is going to contract itself. So the brain inside of that is going to be doubly contracted.
And that's going to be a drop of seed. The action, out of love.
You go into the seed, you go into a seed, you went to a different place.
I'm going to Malchus.
Yeah, but there's two processes. You missed the introduction, unfortunately, because we started a little bit early, but we're going to start at 7:15 these days. But there's two processes that come from the brain. One produces like ideas, and one produces seed. Two different things, right? We spoke about it before.
Yeah. But that's what we talked about the other one. On the other lesson is the idea is purely psychological and.
I'm saying, so here, when it comes through the emotions, it can either produce words, or it could produce seeds. It goes in a different direction, right? It's a different process based on how high of a potency is coming from the brain.
So the thoughts in the brain, the thoughts in the heart, what is that?
There's thought in the brain. There's there's intelligence that resides in the brain, right?
Yeah.
And what resides in your heart? Normally, not thinking intelligence does not reside in your heart. Emotion resides in your heart. But where do emotions come from? You can't have an emotion unless there's a reason for that emotion. So some of the intelligence in the brain has to sort of inject itself into the heart in order to produce the emotion. But what we're saying is it's a highly contracted level of intelligence. Only that tiny measure of intelligence, which is sufficient to power an emotion, not the pure version of intelligence, which is intelligence proper.
Okay. Huh.
And in fact, what he's saying is there's no comparison to the level of intelligence in the emotions compared to that's what's in the brain. It's a tremendous tzimtzum. The kach b'chinas hamochin shemishachim b'midos da'atzilus, and so too we're saying that the mind, which is drawn into the midos of Atzilus, ein lehen erech legabi etzem hamochin de chochma bina. They also have no comparison to the essential mind, which is called chochma and bina of Atzilus, right? When Hashem comes down and sort of brings that godly energy into his up, down, north, south, east, west, right? The godly energy which goes in there to power those directions, as it were, is incomparable. Tiny drop compared to what was in the mind which preceded it.
Even though it's in the same world.
Even though it's in the same world, exactly. Because it's contracted not just a little ray, but it's changed its very essence to go from mind to heart. Those are two different, like in other words, from intellect to emotion. They're two different dimensions, right? And they don't even speak the same language. Like an intelligent thing and a feeling of emotion are like, we literally call them two different worlds, right?
Wait, in this analogy, what was the intellect and what was the emotion?
The Chabad and the Midos.
But you're saying the stuff that powers the Chabad of Atzilus is
Mind, right? The mind of God.
and that's incomparably
great to the mind of God that contracts itself to power the emotions, because when it comes down to power the emotions, it changes from being intellect to the emotions of God. It's no longer the mind of God, it's now the emotions of God. And now, even though there's a little bit of mind to power those emotions, it's incomparable to the mind itself.
And the emotions of God we're talking about here are the Chachma Bina Das in this case?
No, the emotions are the Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod. And Yesod, that's what's called the Midos. In general, it's called the emotions all the time.
So what's
Chachma Bina and Das is mind.
Chabad,
right? Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod. Yesod is emotions.
So the Chachma Bina Das is incomparably great into the emotions, or this thing that powering the Chachma Bina Das is incomparably great to the
thing that's powering the emotions,
which is the Chachma Bina Das,
which is the contracted version of the Chachma of the Chabad, is incomparable to the Chabad proper as it is in its own place.
Wouldn't you say that it's not the contracted version? The contracted version is the midot. The Chabad is the pnimiyut of the.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a Chabad proper at a higher level than the Chabad of Atzilus?
No, I mean we're not catching the same train here.
Yeah.
Chabad of Atzilus, midos of Atzilus.
Yeah.
You get the difference between those two things? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what we're saying. They're two different dimensions. They're incomparable to each other. The only thing is what? That the midos of Atzilus cannot exist unless they are powered by some ray of the Chabad of Atzilus.
Oh, okay.
And what we're saying is that ray, which is also a measure of Chabad of Atzilus, because it's coming from Chabad, it's incomparable to the actual Chabad of Atzilus. So the Chabad, which is in the midos, is now of the characteristics of emotions, as opposed to it's in its source, it has the characteristics of actual intelligence. Okay. That's what the 6 days of creation really mean. They come from the 6 extremities of Atzilus. That's why there are 6 days. Like you were asking before, like, what do you mean angels go to the bathroom? We were talking about before. Like everything in this world is a physical manifestation of some spiritual dimension of reality. Why is there 6 days in a week? Right? It's only reason there's 6 days in a week is because there's 6 attributes of Atzilus. That's like really what's going on. And if we want to get like a hint of an edge of an understanding of what's going on with godliness, so he created this concept of 6 days in a week, so we can sort of like see, there's 6 things here, and then it comes, and then Shabbos, right? So the main Indian of 6 days, like the 6 days of creation, it doesn't start with our world being created in 6 days, consecutively one after the other. The source of 6 days of creation is the 6 midos of Atzilus, right? And then when it comes out down here, so then biyom aleph nimshach mochin lechesed dezah. So what is day one? Day one is that you have a drawing forth of the mind, right? Of Chochmah Bina Das of Atzilus into Chesed of Zah. On day two, it's a drawing forth of the mind into Gevura of Zah. Right? So the 6 days is basically a ray of the mind into one of the 6 different emotions. That huge contraction comes from the mind, and it can manifest itself in 6 unique different ways. That's why there's 6 different extremities. Hainu bichlal vav alafim shana dahavi alma. And if you want to take that into like a more broad perspective, don't think 6 days of a week, but it's actually 6,000 years, which makes up the whole world. That the whole creation is going to be 6,000 years, right? We're getting very close to the end, and then the 7,000th year is Shabbos, right? So why? And that's the end, right? Then there's some kind of a new. Then we'll have some kind of another one, right? Another Shemitah cycle, but it's going to be like in a completely higher dimension within messianic proportions. But the whole existence, right? Yeah, call us crazy, and you will. The origin of all things was 5,782 years ago, and the Rebbe went to the Sorbonne and learned under Einstein and was the greatest scientist too. Okay, but this is what we believe. I mean to say it's not a contradiction; it's for another time. But all of existence, physical reality itself, came into existence merely 5,782 years ago. And what we're saying is that each 1,000 years, right, was basically another hamshacha, another drawing forth of the chokhmah of Atzilus into a particular midah. First 1,000 years it went into Chesed. The second 1,000 years it went into Gevura. The third 1,000 years it went into Tiferes. Right. So we are living in the dimension of Yesod right now. And that's why the Rebbe says that his father-in-law is Mashiach, because his father-in-law was the 6th Rebbe who represents Yesod, and like we're in his time, right? The Rebbe is a little bit before his. People say the Rebbe is ahead of his time, right? He literally is, because Malchus doesn't happen until the 7,000th year.
And Malchut is going to be the kingdom.
Malchut is the ultimate kingdom of heaven that will be on earth.
But then the Mashiach it represents the 8th in that lineage, right? Of the 10th?
No, the 7th. Yeah. Anyway, let's not jump classes over here. But what I'm trying to say is, even those 6,000 years, that's also just an expression of how it really, the origin of it is not 6,000 years. It's 6 spheros of Atzilus. And that's all happened at one time, really. Hashem brought the mochin, the mind, into at one time, Sheishis Yamim, not in 6 days, but all 6 days at once. He said boom, 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 all at once, and it wasn't one after the next. It was one big boom, right? And it was 6 midos. And then when we want to like get a glimpse of what those are, then he reveals them to us one after the next. Elef Aleph b'chinas Chesed dezah. And again, the first 1,000 years was a hamshacha of mind into Chesed, etc. And this is like the pasuk, which is very significant pasuk, because he explains this whole thing. To Tehillim, it says 1,000 years in your eyes was like a bygone yesterday. So that's actually an exact thing. 1,000 years for Hashem is for us is like one day in Hashem's eyes, which means to say that the 6 days of creation, they're really 1,000 years. So when Hashem created, so to speak, 6 days. For him, it's 6 days, but the way we experience each day is that one day for Hashem is 1,000 years for us, right? So when Hashem made he really made 6,000 years in 6 days, because for him, the 6 days each one contains like a nugget of 1,000 years at a time. So that's what we're saying. B'chol Rosh Hashanah v'Rosh Hashanah. Now, what's Rosh Hashanah now? We can have a little glimpse of it. Every Rosh Hashanah, what's taking place there is that there's a renewal of life force into the worlds from its source, which is the 6 extremities of Atzilus, right? So it's like, for Hashem, all those 1,000 years are happening like in one day. But for us, we experience it temporally, day after day. So when there's a new year, we're getting like a new nugget of time that's coming out to express it. that midah of God, right? So right now we're like 782 parts into Yesod of Atzilus. We want to see what the 783rd part of Yesod of Atzilus looks like. So for that whole it's gonna come out as like one big package, which basically happens on Rosh Hashanah. What we're getting is basically a renewal of Chokhmah into Yesod of Atzilus, and one more aspect of it that's going to now like reveal itself in our temporary world, temporal world.
Yeah.
And since all we're really seeing is another piece of Yesod, of another piece of an emotion coming out, then even though we're getting it from the emotion, we're seeing like a one more aspect of the midah, but for that midah to express itself, we now know enough to know that it needs to have a renewal from its source. So the mind of Atzilus has to sort of re-engage and flow into Yesod in order for one more aspect of Yesod to pop out as a new year for us. So again, let me try and explain what he's trying to say here. What's really taking place is we're getting in one more year, one more unit of the sphere of Yesod revealed to us. But what he's saying is, in order for that to happen, that unit of Yesod itself has to be generated by the mind which produces it. And so therefore, there's not just a hamshacha from the midos to create the new year. There has to be a hamshacha from the mochin into that midah in order to create the new year. A drawing forth.
From the mochin?
The mind.
The mind, the chokhmah.
Right? The chokhmah, he says, Abba and Ima, from the mother and the father, which is the Abba and Ima, the chokhmah and the bina, which is on a different plane than the midos, but they drop a little bomb of intelligence into the midah in order to create the midah. That whole process has to happen in order for the midah in Atzilus to then eke out another year for us. So we're not just drawing from the midah is the point, we're drawing from the mind, which is then drawn into the midah, which then creates the next year.
And with all these...
Does anyone understand this?
Yeah, but is there something that's in the mind that's been there since the creation, or is there something new that's being drawn into the mind?
So that's the perfect question to ask. That shows me that you understand what I'm saying. So yeah, we just got through saying the mind itself has to renew, but you say, well, what's going to renew the mind?
Yeah.
How far up does this thing go? So that's the good question. No, the mind also needs a little triggering.
Yeah, we get
So
to
we'll see that, and that's what we're going to see. That's where the shofar gets involved.
This is juicy.
Shofar gadol.
Yeah.
I like it.
V'zeu am lefanei malchus. Right, and this is what it means that we're supposed to say verses of kingship before Hashem on Rosh Hashanah. If you look in the Shemona Esrei, we say 10 different verses which mention that Hashem is a king, right? And the idea is, why are we doing that? Because what is Malchus? It's basically Hashem speaking out some aspect of his midos, right? That they should come out. Let's go back to what we said before. There's the 6 midos, and then they has to all come through Malchus, which is speech. So we're saying, Hashem says, say verses of Malchus before me, which is another way of saying, like, get me to talk. Right? And if you want me to get me to talk, it has to be generated from the emotion that's going to cause that talk. And if you want the emotion to cause that talk, you have to generate from the mind which causes the emotion to cause that talk. V'chein inyan zichron liyom rishon, as the same thing when we say Tiku b'chodesh shofar, right? Kes liyom chagenu zikron liyom rishon, and we say that Rosh Hashanah is a remembrance of the first day. Right? Of course it is, because just like the first day he had to generate from the mind into the emotion in order to speak the world into creation, it's really happening all again, because this new year, this new element, this new dimension of this new midah that he wants to reveal to us in 5783, it's like the first day. He has to basically bring down that whole process and like eke out that next piece of himself to reveal it. This is arousing Hashem all over again to basically build the worlds from their original source. So there's not really much difference from like the first day of year 1 to year 5783. He has to go through that same process of basically letting out a whole other unit of expression.
So, but he adds another layer.
He adds another layer.
Okay.
Well, it's another, say layer, you could say.
A fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a layer.
Yeah, I mean, again, you could call it a layer, but really, it's
A contraction in a way.
okay.
Right? I don't know.
Yeah, it's the next unit. The point is that each one of them is equally significant. They're just different. Basically, there's 6,000 unique ways to color the entirety of those 6 midos. So each time you get like a new color in your crayon box. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and the crayon box without all the colors is not, you don't have anything, right? So each one is like equally as significant. They're all like blended to express God. And we won't understand it all until the end. That's why like there's the Mashiach comes at the end.
And then when we tip over to a next millennia, like when we go from year 3,900,
It changes Midah.
Then you really add another.
Yes,
Midah, right?
yes.
Okay, and so if we just think about history, does it mean then that the 2,000 year of human existence was only functioning on those two midot?
Think about it for a second. The first 1,000 years, people lived for 1,000 years.
Really? Is that a thing?
Adam lived for 970 years or something, right? So 930 years. So why? Because Chesed was ruling the world. And Chesed just lets you go on forever, whether you sin, whether you don't sin, you can just keep not being punished. The second 1,000 years was the flood and the dispersion, total destruction on earth because Gevurah ran the world. The third 1,000 years was almost 1,000 years of the Beis Hamikdash. It was like harmony, right? So if you look, Tiferes, you look at and Tiferes means beauty, which is like the beauty. It says someone who didn't see the Beis Hamikdash is like he never saw a beautiful building in his life. It's beauty, right? So each of the 1,000 years is basically that midah being
prominent.
fully prominent.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Whoa.
Okay.
We are out of time. We have to kind of keep on a schedule here.
No, let's just keep doing this whole day.
This is a good one.
We got to do slichas.
This is the
We'll
best.
see you for slichas.
What's this one called?